Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Again, welcome to the All Ambient podcast, everyone. My name is Mike Graff. I make music as Dear Gravity, and today I had the chance to connect with TJ Dumser, who makes music as Six Missing. TJ is an incredible guy, has such a great perspective and story behind everything that he does, and I really enjoy his unique take in the ambient space and everything beyond that as well. He's putting out some great art, and we got to talk through some of the ins and outs of not just what happens in the actual creation of the music, but more the mindset behind it and how that influences why we make what we make. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's dig right into my conversation with TJ Dumser of Six Missing. Well, I am thrilled to welcome to the All Ambient podcast someone who I've been listening to for quite a while, and I just cannot be more excited to have the chance to sit down with him in the All Ambient interview room. TJ Dumser of Six Missing. Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, man. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, well, and it goes both ways. I promise you, I am not just blowing smoke. Really glad to have you. We're going to get into all sorts of stuff. You've got, I just even earlier today was listening to, and don't get me wrong, your entire catalog is prolific and it all is just awesome. But I was spinning, and technically, as of time of recording, I don't think the whole thing is even out to the world yet, but I was listening to the tracks that you have released so far of Gentle Breath, which I believe is dropping at time of recording. It's dropping tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, you and I are sharing a release day, actually, because you have a record coming out
Hooray!
Tomorrow,
Stoked about that. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So just sneaking it in towards the end of the year, just under the wire. Right? Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, man, I was really enjoying it. There were just some of the complexities it was going places with some of the way that you were crafting your sounds. I was like, oh, it just feels so good. You really have such an ear for doing something unique. And I love what you're up to, man. I really do.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And honestly, that it goes both ways too. And if I may just say, like, I've been listening to you for a good number of years now as well too. And prolific, my goodness. And we even had the opportunity to we did a track together, forget now, but it was definitely during the pandemic, but I did a remix of a track of yours all these years ago. Static,
oh man. Yeah. So that was a Valley View release. Totally. And you know what? Matt and Henrik wound up doing all of the, the brilliant minds that they are who run all the, Valley View stuff and all that. I think they wound up just handling, because Static, I think I was collabing with Matt on that, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And so I think he wound up just kind of setting up some of the reworks and all that. And so I loved what you did on that one, but I think maybe we got the chance in a email group conversation for me to be like, hey, thanks TJ or something like that. I think that may have been about the whole of our interaction or something.
Oh, definitely. We were just names in inboxes for sure. But that was the first time, when that came in, that was when I got introduced to you and your work. Sure. And that's when it was a very easy yes for me to jump on board and get the opportunity to work with all of your stems in that way. Is always so fun to hear how it kind of all gets put together by everybody's different brains and the way everybody sees the world. It's so fun. That's why I love doing reworks, remixes, all of that stuff. It's you just selfishly get to see what's going into the sauce, so to speak.
Absolutely. What a genre that we all kind of flex in, where in a sense you can hear some similarities, but also there's just so many unique little things and principles and sounds that you catch along the way. And I think you do such a great job of carving your own niche is not the right word, but kind of carving your own space, your own, set of fences that really, really translate well. And I love what you're up to, man, for sure. It's really, Yeah, it's great.
I really appreciate that, Mike. Well, it was great chatting with you. Thanks so much for having me. So.
Thanks for joining us, son. Oh, so good. Well, man, TJ, probably a good place to start would be maybe at the beginning of the story. I'd love to hear sort of the origin story of how music sort of got folded into your life, whether that was super young or just kind of along the journey. But at what point you kind of, maybe it was like an experience with a song or an instrument or something, but at some point where you started identifying like, okay, music, I think is going to be a pretty significant part of this life journey. Tell me a little bit about the story, man.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Great question to kick it off too. I mean, music was always a part of my household. My mom was a dance instructor. So we were always listening to, growing up, I just remember like a lot of like Whitney Houston, a lot of like 90s dance pop type of stuff. So always in my head, there was, the greats, so to speak, in that world. But it wasn't until I started poking around in my grandma's attic that I found, so my dad and his brother, my uncle, their record collection. And I started going through it, and it was just like all of these pictures and the covers and everything were so mystical to me. And I found this one that had a lineup of people on it, and they looked kind of weird. And there was this giant blimp. And I was like, what is this? And who is Led Zeppelin? And I put that on the turntable, and I heard, I think it starts with Black Dog, and then making it, the side closer of Stairway to Heaven. And I was just like, holy cow, like, what is this? And from there, it was just like my world exploded. And so then it was just classic rock for me. And it was Derek and the Dominoes, Eric Clapton, Allman Brothers, Metallica, AC/DC, the Beatles, literally all of the classics, I guess you could say. And I just was totally like absorbing it all. And I really wanted to pick up a guitar because I was getting I guess it was the Sam Ash magazines at the time were just kind of like being sent to the house.
Sam Ash, man.
I know, right? It is. I actually do feel really sad about it because it was such like a fun experience, like getting this magazine. I think in a lot of ways, like how some people like discovered their own like sexuality by finding like a Playboy in their dad's room. I was getting the like Sam Ash magazines, and I had an awakening of my like musical love.
There you go. I remember those magazines, certainly the Sam Ashes and the Guitar Centers and the whole stack of them. Yeah. Please continue. I love that. Yeah.
And I knew nothing about guitar. I was young. I was 10 to 11. And my parents were like, if you're going to do this, like you should learn piano, you should learn the real way. And we'll start you and your sister taking lessons. And it was just far too slow and boring for me, and I lost interest in it. And, I think I had to prove myself to my parents that I was serious enough to pick up a guitar. And they finally caved and got me one. And I started learning, Layla and every AC/DC song I could possibly muster. And so my life was a lot of like garage rock bands, being in bands with my friends, playing shows in quotes at, people's backyards and all of those things. Very traditional, like rock and roll. And that continued well into my adult life, like playing in indie rock bands, folk rock bands, becoming a vocalist, just, being in metal bands. But it wasn't until like I started getting into effect pedals that I discovered this entire world of ambient music. And it was kind of, an eye-opening experience to all of a sudden then discover Brian Eno and Tangerine Dream and all of the, Paul Horn, Harold Budd, like all of this like classic ambient stuff, and being like, holy shit, like this is awesome. This is what I'm all about.
It's like a whole new wave of discovery. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like kind of, discovering music all over again, and in the way that I did in college when, you start experimenting with certain things and you listen to a jazz record and you hear like Dave Brubeck's Take 5 for the first time, and your mind is seeing colors just like, wow, this is like, what is this? So it just kind of like unfolded, and it's still unfolding to this day, just like finding new things. I don't know. It sounds so cliche to say, but like music is the only thing in my life that has been consistently just like fascinating, intriguing, and just a love of mine. I can't get enough of it. And like, there's just so much of it. It's really like, it's just beautiful, you know?
Yeah.
How did you begin? I mean, like, enough about me now.
Oh man, the shortest version of that story. I started a long time ago on piano, and then just kind of grew and took piano lessons, took drum lessons. Having the theory down was enough to kind of teach myself some of the other instruments, but a lot of it was very similar to you, where things may have been kind of slow, but I think what I wound up doing is I wound up channeling like the extra energy I had from the slowness of learning piano into like, well, I don't know, like this music's kind of boring on the like, you know, just the chopsticks or the, you know, the you just some of the, you know, the very simple exercise songs. And I just started like making my own. Not that they were any good. I mean, I still remember a couple of those progressions though. And it's like, I like that. I like putting things together that sound kind of fun when you sort of smack them together. And then so I just started, it was on an early Korg keyboard. I started sequencing on, I mean, we're talking, you know, this is starting to date all of us, but back when, you know, the big keyboard workstation was a big deal, and the fact that you could sequence 16 tracks on the physical keyboard itself was just you know, mind-blowing. And so that was when I started playing around in just, you know, kind of the instrumental world, and like, oh, okay, I really like this. And I play with a lot of bands too, but then at some point it was kind of a reminder back to what I've been doing for so long. Music was always a part of life, and I wound up playing with different groups and all that, but it just came back to sort of that original love of just making the thing, and not that there even had to be lyric attached to it. I love so much music that's not instrumental, but for my own stuff, I was like, man, I think this is the lane in which I'm able to be most free, most prolific, most, you know, kind of the walls are knocked down, where I'm like, I don't feel much of a limitation. Let's just do what we want to do. And that was really encouraging. And so, not trying to connect dots where there are not dots to connect, but where it's like you kind of go, you know, hearing your story, like you kind of go through this journey of, well, I learned this here and I learned this here and I experienced this, and how so many of those different things just kind of guide the journey. Not that it all comes to the same place or that we all need to arrive at a similar place, but I do love how one kind of musical experience can inform another, even if it's like a completely different genre or a completely different scenario. Maybe even, you know, someone who is trained classically and now wants to do the exact opposite, or someone who doesn't have theory at all and now really, you know, respects the grid, if you will, and like the rules of music because of some of the beautiful things that it can create when you play within some of those rules. I love how all that can coexist. You know, you can have a journey, I can have a journey, and we all can arrive at this place where we're making really unique to ourselves music that sounds like when I hear your stuff, TJ, like it's like, it sounds like Six Missing, like you sound like you. And I think that is such a, especially in this world of increasing, not that music is content, but you know, that there's just content creation everywhere. It's like, man, it's not a bad thing to sound like yourself in a world where everything kind of gets blended in. So man,
I think that's really awesome to hear your journey of that too. And you know, what you just said resonates with me, because when I was in bands, I remember specific moments where we would be playing or trying to write a song, and we were always, whether we were conscious of it or not, trying to write kind of the song that we just heard the band that we really like do. You know, when I was in another band, it was always kind of like thinking of it through the lens, whether we were acknowledging it or not, of another band. And I remember specifically kind of having these moments of being like, well, there already is that band. Like, what the world needs is you to be you, so that you can sound just like yourself. And there's absolutely like nothing wrong with acknowledging, I think, influences. And I think whether we know it or not, it all influences us, and it all gets like kind of filtered through our own language, I guess. And that's the fun part for me is like, like you just said, hearing, because oftentimes I'll just put on something and just let it shuffle. Like hearing something that I can then identify and be like, oh, I think that sounds like, oh, yep, it is. Okay, cool. Like there are those kind of like key identifiers in music that are just like uniquely those people. And I think that's all like, it takes so long to find that in yourself, or even just feeling willing to accept your voice, I think sometimes too. But I feel like, and it can be frustrating too, right? Like there are certain times when I want to write something that it sounds different. And then it's just, it comes out the way that it comes out. And then that happens to be just like the other thing. And I'm like, well, damn it. Like, really wanted to try to do something else. And that's like, I guess that's the skill, the gift that certain people have, is to continue to like push yourself. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole though, I guess, is if you continue to just acquire. So I did have to put a stop to that.
I hear it's a great exercise, but one could definitely get lost in the downward spiral for sure. Yeah, I totally hear you there. Oh, it's good. Seriously, we're gonna keep going. The vibe in your studio, TJ, is just I love. There's like a warm, like kind of a dim but a warm glow to it, and it's a total vibe. I mean,
we have similar but very different vibes going on.
We do.
We both have vibes with the capital V. We do. I think
mine. I promise the video capture makes this look a lot more purple than it actually is. It's more of just like the LED white glow, if you will. But it sure it's.
So do you feel like that kind of like gets you in the right headspace to create, or is it just kind of like what you like to see? I guess to be a bit simplistic.
Well, so they're all like they're DMX controlled. Not that I have like light shows in here, but like I can kind of change the mood color at any point if I want to kind of set it more of like a warm or more of a blue or whatever. But I do, yes, to answer your question, I do think that just the feel of a space can go a long way just to continue to encourage me to be focused on what I'm doing. Not that it is the thing that makes or breaks it, but it is certainly a nice little nudge in the right direction. So yeah.
I mean, talking about studios in general, this is my first kind of real space outside of working at studios. So my past is that I'm kind of like split professions in that I do sound design and mix for film and TV and commercials. And then I also do Six Missing. So I had my day job, which was working at like commercial studios in Manhattan, which was an awesome thing because I got free studio time for any band that I was in. So we could always just kind of like 601, we're going to start setting up the drums and doing this thing. But when I went freelance, I was just kind of hopping around studios around the city. And so I only was kind of making and creating at home, which in a 1-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens was challenging.
Right.
Having an amp and guitars and pedals and all of this thing, it was always like there was a hurdle to creating anything. So before I did anything, I had to take out a bag, unzip the bag, take the pedals out, plug them in. And that's like already 4 steps too many for me,
it's
at least.
Very true. Yep.
And then our second place that we moved to, we had a 2-bedroom apartment, but we were sharing the second bedroom as kind of our home office. So my wife and I were back to back. I had a desk on one side, she had a desk on another. So everything was in headphones at odd hours. And again, similarly, I was just, pulling the bag out of the closet to set the pedals up, to set the camera up, to do the thing. And obviously like it works and you can make it work. But I was kind of striving to get back to that place where I could just have everything set up and I could have everything plugged in and ready to go. And so we moved from New York, which is where I'm from. We were talking about before we started this, 20 days before the pandemic hit, to Austin. And we were spending less on a house that we were renting in Austin than we were on a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens.
Right.
And I finally got my own room. So like I had space and it became kind of like this, unleashing of creativity. And I was like, I knew it. I knew if I just like had the space to do it, I would be able to do this more and more freely. But that was still within the house. So like I was in headphones and I didn't want to bother my wife while she was working at home. And we were obviously both going through the pandemic together. And then in March of this year, we bought our first house here and it had a studio space. So I'm like, now I can, work in speakers and make noise and have all of this. And it's awesome. But I think like you said, you were watching it on social media and stuff. And like, it's fun to share that stuff. But I always feel like I need to give a disclaimer to that. Cause it's like, this took me 20 years. Like this took so long to get to this point. Like for people that just discover you or find you or just getting started out, they're like, oh man, I need that. And it's like, no, you don't. Like you don't, and you probably will eventually, like, but gotta like have fun on the ride until you get there.
I love that you said that because that's absolutely where I was going to go. Like just to even kind of hearing your story, in the back of my head, I was like, man, like what and I'm not trying to just find a silver lining in it, but like what a gift it can be for you to have. And I, very similar situation to me as well, but where you have kind of limited circumstances and clearly like within those limited circumstances, you're like, man, wouldn't it be great if I was able to, like you can kind of identify some of those things, but you also make the most of what you have. And it doesn't stop you from pursuing, your calling, pursuing what you feel like you've just got in your bones that you're, here to do. This music is just bursting out of you. And so for you to create to the highest degree you can with whatever circumstances you're in, and then allowing for that, like you said, like years down the road or months or year, whatever the timeline looks like for whoever, to when that situation comes where you get that chance, it's like both things. Like you are that much more informed on what is going to be really helpful for your space. But also it's funny how like by the time that you get the space where you get to just make music freely, you understand that you don't need the space, that you're not going to let the lack of a space stop you from making music, even though you now have a space where you get to freely make music. And so it's kind of what that whole journey of
it's like the circle of gratitude almost. Like it's like having being grateful for the fact that I'm like, I still feel this way every day I walk through the door of this. It's like, oh wow, I'm walking through a door to my studio now, which is really cool. So like that in and of itself, I'm like, great, I'm happy. Like that's awesome. I don't need 3/4 of the things that I have in here to do the stuff that in at least my musical life I do. Is it a lot more fun? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is inspiring as well. But we don't having the gratitude for the journey, I think is like one of the biggest things. And even just like where things are at these days, not to sound like a total old fogey, but like thinking about the first way that I used to record on like a boombox that had a built-in microphone that was recording to a cassette, and you would make like your radio show mixtapes that way. Moving up to the 4-track like Tascam Fostex type of thing.
Studio. Oh man. Yeah.
And then did you ever have a zip recorder?
No, I skipped that phase, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Not very large in their storage capacity. And then you needed its own special reader to then convert the files from the files that you recorded on the zip into usable files.
Right.
So that didn't last very long for me either. And then it went to, built-in storage, like the Roland or the Boss recorders that they had, kind of those like studio in a boxes. And then going from that to digital stuff, I think I probably had GarageBand built into my Mac, and then upgrading to Pro Tools. It was like a whole new world. It was just so crazy. But having gratitude for the fact that you even have a DAW now for free built into computers that come out is just like,
oh, seriously.
Man, I don't want to sound like kids these days, but boy, do they have it easy right now. Like just to like have access to sounds and like knocking down a barrier to creating. I think it's so cool that they can just kind of dive right in and get started on that. Just to even see like, is this something I like? Like the barrier of the investment jumping into it is so much smaller. Like you can really just kind of get started and see what works and see what doesn't. And even if you like it.
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, the fact that like it's not connected to the internet or anything, but my 9-year-old has a kind of a bigger desk in his room. So I just grabbed an old second monitor that I had and bought him like a $200 used Mac Mini and grabbed one of my MIDI controllers that was kind of gathering dust. And we bought him like a $50, blue USB microphone, and he has more computing and recording power in his little bedroom setup right now than I did at age, I don't know, like even into my early 20s with, like the first times that I was starting to use Pro Tools and trying to buy a laptop that could keep up with all that. Like it is dwarfed by, these things that, again, like it's just, I did not buy him the new, Mac Studio or any, like it is like a 7-year-old mini and he is crushing it. And yeah, just the ability to try things, the ability to play around and to allow for that ease of entry to be low enough where, to be honest, like I'm usually the guy who tries to like play devil's advocate a little bit. There probably is something valuable about like having to rise to the echelon of like, okay, so now I've got skin in the game. Like here's where we're at. So now I'm going to do something with it. Like I get the value of that, but also like you said, just to afford the opportunity to play around, see if you like it, see what you like about it, what things excite you, what things don't. That is a whole new gift that this next group of creatives coming up are receiving. And I honestly think that because of the lower barrier of entry, that just means that the stuff that is going to stand out is going to be that much better, right? Like I think it's going to force, and it already is, forcing an even greater level of creative ingenuity for sure.
Yeah. And I think like from a really positive outlook on it too, like it forces everybody, it kind of boosts the quality overall. Kind of across the board, because the things that are going to be like, that's why I'm not totally, maybe in 5 years we can revisit this episode and be like, he was totally wrong. But I'm not like totally worried about AI type of music and all of that stuff, because I feel like humans are always going to want to create art. And as a human that consumes human-made art, I like to think that I can tell the difference between that, where you can tell somebody spent some time with this, somebody put their emotion into it. They spent even just an afternoon with it instead of like, 15 minutes writing a prompt that is generating this thing. So I think it's really elevating us all creatives across the board to, somebody that's coming in hot on, upon entry that is just this prodigy. Like it's going to force the people that have been doing it for a while to not be complacent. Like you got to really kind of like continue to elevate your own work. Definitely didn't see us taking this approach in the conversation where I'm not even that old. I don't even know why I'm talking about it.
No. And not to cut you off, I want to keep hearing more, but on the bigger kind of all ambient podcast, we do a handful of roundtable episodes every so often, and then like music news. So I get the chance to chat with Kirk Smith of We Dream of Eden, and then Ben Tatlow of, all the things that Ben does, Antarctic Wastelands and all that, everything. And then Marshall Usinger, Be Still the Earth. We talk about just a lot of random stuff all the time, but it has been circling back around AI more and more, not even intentionally, but just it has less to do with the, oh man, what's going to happen? And more to do with exactly what you're saying. Like the idea of, even if we're able to just generate quote music content at the, at a single, hit the enter key and then there goes your prompt and away it goes. It cannot replace the ability for something made by humans to move humans to the degree that it does. Like and again, we could go off for a long time on this, but it is a running theme. You're not off base on this by any means. And you are in good company on like just being willing to talk about it, not be scared by it, but also like, okay, like you're part of the conversation now. So what do we do?
Yeah.
But
it's also, it's kind of had this weird effect on me where it's made me, I've been very curious about it. And like I've poked around in it and I've seen people create some really truly like leveraging the AI type of technology in an artistic way, using it as a tool, because to kind of like write it off or poo-poo it would be as silly as saying like, Queen has that record where it says like no synthesizers used. And then the next record they did, it was like synths and all this stuff. Yeah. And that's fine. But like, I think the effect it's had on me personally as somebody that writes and creates music as a form of like self-soothing and self-therapy in a certain way is it's made me go backwards in kind of across the board. Like I got a TV with a VCR off of eBay because I wanted to go back to like VHS. I wanted to see like that kind of like intimate experience on a small screen in that way. As everything's going so forward into immersive Atmos sound, I was going backwards in time to appreciate kind of like the art and the artistry that there is in crafting like a score and dialogue and sound design in a mix format of something as huge as the Terminator, but knowing that it has to like exist on a small screen, on a small speaker. There's an art to making that all work. And like, I don't know, it's so AI has like pushed me back in time. Like, that's why I love old synths. I love old machines. I love old tape machines. Like all the old stuff I've just gone back to and kind of re-appreciated and found like a whole new love for what it is. So for that alone, I'm kind of like, great, because if that's happening to me, it's happening to a bunch of other people. And maybe we can, you know, kind of have a fighting chance against the machines when they do rise up in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced Terminator, and that was probably my first moment of feeling like, okay, so this whole self-aware thing, like how legit? Yes. I'll be taping our conspiracy podcast in just a couple of minutes, so we'll officially hit stop on this one, and we'll start an episode for the other podcast. No,
perfect. I'll go get my tinfoil hat. That'll be good.
But for real, the soundtrack to that, though, even I'm with you, not only on the translating to, you know, to the smaller screen and the smaller speakers, but with just such a different set of limits on what you could do with a soundtrack back then versus what you can do, you know, like if Terminator was being released today, which is, I think, almost to the year, probably close to 40, maybe just a little more, maybe a little less than the very first one. And yet some of those just really, really, you know, like beautiful analogs. Like it wasn't like this glorious sound that was dialed in that just takes your breath away, but it was exactly what the moment needed. The melody is just so cool. It just, I'm
made so like in his garage, like James Cameron going to Brad's like garage, like that wouldn't happen this day and age. Like you're not going to see, even James Cameron probably wouldn't be making a movie and going to some composer's garage. Like he'd want to go to the studio and have the thing. And like, I think that kind of circles it around, not to like so effortlessly try to make a through line here to like not necessarily like needing all of these tools to create the type of music that we do, but it is nice. But like you don't have to have all of this stuff to have the dream, to have the passion for it. You know, now everything's MIDI clocked and synced and all this stuff. I mean, when he was doing the score for Terminator, it was all by hand. There was no MIDI clock. Like he was adjusting arpeggiated tempos by ear, and like, how cool is that?
What an art form in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe, and that's what I mean about like going back in time and technology. Like now someone that had kind of done something like that, getting the gift of MIDI time code and beat clock and all this stuff, you're like, oh, wow, amazing. This makes my job so much easier now. But yeah, wow, I've really sounded like an old fogey this episode so far. This is cool.
I promise that was never an intent. And no, I'm kidding. The whole journey, right? Like it does make me smile to think of, you know, in 30 years when someone's going to be recording a podcast very similar to ours with some, you know, like a couple artists who are, you know, doing work in their field, and they're talking about what movie of this year, you know, what like art movement that's happening right now is going to be the thing that they're talking about, that they're like, wow, like, do you remember? And I mean, you could, hindsight's 2020, so they'll be spot on. But yeah, I kind of stop and wonder a little bit, like, is there something right now that I need to be aware of? Or, and I, you know, and not in a braggadocious or, you know, selfish sort of way, but I honestly, one of the things that gets me most excited is just turning back to stuff that you're doing, stuff that, you know, that myself and everyone else on, you know, within all the different kind of artist circles that we hang in are creating. Like those are the things where, man, like in a sea of kind of crazy stuff that's going on, and some of it is copycat and some of it is AI and some of it is just beyond me. There still feels like a genuine expression that still has so many little nuances to it, and everyone's got kind of a different bent on it in like the ambient field that still gets me excited right now. I don't think I'm making that up. And of course I am completely biased in every way, but I love just kind of basking in just what you've created, just turn it on and letting that speak in ways that not every art form does these days. I love being moved by art, and it might look a little different what happens in 2024 than, the stuff that happened in 1984 and everything from there.
Yeah.
I'm with you on just the experiential piece of that and finding the beautiful things about it. And that's really cool.
Yeah. Man. The feeling is very mutual, and honestly across the board in just kind of the ambient genre, which I feel like is kind of just so vast. And I feel like that's really the most fun part, because as an artist, it feels like you have so much room to experiment, and you can still be within your boundaries, I guess, to say like, ambient, because it is so loosely used, I guess, in terms sometimes, it does allow you a lot of breathing room. And not to, because like, I don't know when this will come out, but yeah, I do have a record out tomorrow, which is kind of this interesting change from a sound that I had established. And so I was very nervous about it kind of in the initial phases of thinking about like, is this stuff I'm going to share? But then I fell back upon what we were just talking about, is because it is this kind of wide open space of just expression in this genre of ambient. I felt comfortable enough knowing like, my peers will probably listen and accept it and at least take it as a grain of salt of like where I am at now as an artist. And maybe they can sympathize with those feelings as well of wanting to experiment a little past, get your elbow room a little wider from where you are. But then also, I think the beautiful thing about ambient is it can be so emotional. And at least it is for me, like creating it and sharing it, and how I am kind of trying to use it in this therapeutic, journalistic way. And I feel like from a human to another human, there's going to be that subconscious resonance that I think and I hope people find when they listen to at least this record, but also I know that they find when they listen to Dear Gravity, when they listen to Antarctic Wastelands, like all of this stuff, like within this community that's why, I don't know, it's so cool. And it's like, it's the positive side of social media and the world that we live in, is that we were all kind of able to discover that, it's a big world, but that we're in kind of this part of it, that we all exist together, sharing a lot of same things. And that's just, I don't know, not to be reductive, it's just so cool.
Yeah, you're spot on, and for a variety of reasons, and not that I have to attempt to sound smart or anything in that moment. It is great to know that you're not in it alone. It is great to know everything that you just said. No need for me to reiterate, but yeah, seriously, man, the work that you're doing is important. It needs to be out there, and it is something that I'm really glad is entering into the conversation for people to listen and contemplate, and for it to be a part of their lives. And I am glad that your stuff exists in the world, for sure.
Yeah, again, the feeling is mutual. And that's like the best part about the time that we live in now, is that so many people can create and share in so many different ways. And that's just like
the absence of the zero-sum game. Yeah, absolutely. It's not like by one person creating, they have now, stolen the opportunity for someone else to create or whatever. It's like, nope, that's not even a little bit of the way that it actually is. In fact, I love the people who create and then inspire other people, and then they come and create. One could even argue, I mean, of course, it's all subjective at that point, but even, wilder art or more beautiful or whatever. And it is the opposite of the zero-sum game. I love everyone who jumps into the pool on that, for sure.
Completely agree.
Man. Okay, so now comes the part where I fully acknowledge that I have like 8 questions that I still wanted to ask you, but we just went into awesome place. And I know that it was exactly what we were supposed to do. I don't doubt that for a second. I'm not saying that because we're happen to be recording right now. It is for sure the conversation that was supposed to happen. And I love it. I really do. But TJ, I am putting you on the spot a little bit. Would it be okay for us to do a part 2 to this someday down the road? Little ways from now?
Absolutely.
Man, I love your heart, but I feel like we're just getting started. There's so much fun stuff yet to uncover. But seriously, just thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for putting out, shameless plug, Gentle Breath being released again. As of time of recording this podcast, it has yet to come out by just about 12 hours or so. But at time of publish, it will be out in the world. So please go listen to Gentle Breath and of course, all of TJ's amazing Six Missing catalog. It is on whatever streaming platform you like to consume your music on. But TJ, man, total pleasure. Wish that we didn't have to be done for right now, but I am already looking forward to the next time we get to do it. Thank you so much for setting aside some time to be here, man. Really means a
Mike,
lot.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our next time.
Oh, what a joy. Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.